Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 4 player game, SpellBook, designed by Phil Walker Harding and published by Space Cowboys, who helped sponsor this video. Here you'll be taking on the role of wizards who've gathered to compete over who can craft the best spells and train the most powerful familiars. But only one will be crowned the most powerful wizard, so join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, put this altar tile and discard tray in the center of the play area. Then take all of the tokens, known as materia, and add them to the included pouch, giving them a good mix. Draw 5 randomly, adding them to the spaces of the altar and setting the pouch nearby. Now have each player take one of these familiar boards. In this video, we'll assume that we have 2 players, returning the rest to the box. Each player then collects the cards that show their familiar pictured here on their backs. Your cards can be organized into 3 different sets based on the symbols found in this area. Cards with a single star are one set, double stars are a separate set, and so are the ones with 3 stars. For your first game, they recommend using just the cards from the single star set, which we'll do here. Arrange these in front of you face up, and then find your player aid, which will also have your familiar symbol here on the back, and set that with your cards as well. And the order you place these in is really up to you. Once you're familiar with this single star set, you might instead want to try the spells from the second set, and then in later games, the third set spells. Once you're familiar with all 3 sets, you can play SpellBook using what is known as the classic mode. As you might have noticed, the spells come in 7 different colors. To play in the classic mode, one person, let's say me, separates all their cards so that their spells are grouped by the same color. Over here, for example, I have my green spells with the 1 star, 2 star, and 3 star. I then shuffle a color group and I draw one spell from it randomly. This is the spell of that color that all players will use for this game. The other cards I can just return to the box. Each of the other players now also finds this exact spell among their cards to place in front of them. I would then do this for each color so that I have one spell from each coming from a mix of the different sets. It might look like this when I'm done. In this way, every player will have the same random assortment of spells in front of themselves. Alternatively, you could also have players decide what mix of 7 different colored spells they want to use. But no matter what mode you're playing in, the important thing is that all players are using the same spells as each other. With the spells determined, each player gains 2 materia from the pouch, and then you randomly give a player this first player token. And that's the setup. In SpellBook, you and the other players will be collecting materia, using them to learn spells and improve your familiar, which both earn you points. Earn the most points by the end of the game, and you win. The game is played over a series of turns, starting with the first player and going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, you complete 3 phases in order: morning, midday, and evening. You'll find these phases listed on your player aid, and during each phase, you can perform at most one of the listed actions. But keep in mind, performing an action is optional, and although you must perform the phases in order, you can skip any you like. With that understood, let's go through each of the possible actions, starting with the options for the morning phase. Here, one action you can perform is to either take 1 materia or draw 2. Any action or effect that instructs you to take materia means you collect it from this altar board to put into your personal pool. However, with this action, you can instead choose to draw 2, and anytime you draw in the game, you take that number of random materia from the pouch and add it to your pool. But, as you're reminded here, you can never have more than 9 materia in your personal pool. This means when taking materia, you must stop as soon as you have 9. If you already had 7 and an effect let you draw 4, you would draw 2 and then ignore any extras you're owed. During the morning phase, instead of taking 1 materia or drawing 2, you can perform a morning card action. However, this action, along with the midday and evening card actions, can only be done once you've learned certain spells, which is something we'll cover later. So we'll come back and explain these actions at that time. For now, though, let's move on to the midday action that's called storing 1. Anytime the game tells you to store something, you move that number of related materia, 1 in this case, from your personal pool to the lowest valued visible space of your familiar board. The next time you store a token, it would go here, and so on. Now this is the last space that can be filled in. If an effect would let you store materia when you have no spaces left, you leave the materia you can't place where it was. As we'll see at the end of the game, you'll earn the points showing on the lowest valued space still visible on your familiar. Moving on to the evening phase, here you can resolve the Learn One Spell action. You start the game with spells in front of you, but they aren't spells you've learned. They're spells you can learn with this action. I should point out each spell has 3 levels of possible effects, which are known from bottom to top as level 3, level 4, and level 5. These levels are based on the dots that you'll find within their spaces. The dots also represent the cost to learn that level of spell. So, as an example, the cost of a level 3 spell is 3, and specifically 3 materia of that spell's color, red in this case. So if I wanted to learn the level 3 version of this spell, I'd spend 3 red materia from my pool. One of these materia you add to the space of the level that you learned, and the others you discard. Anytime you discard materia, you add it to this discard tray. If I had wanted to learn the level 5 version of this spell, I would have instead needed to spend 5 materia, adding one of those here and discarding the rest. The important thing to understand is that each spell can only be learned once. So if you decide to learn the level 3 version of a spell, you can't later use the Learn One Spell action to upgrade it to a higher level. Now I had mentioned that if you're learning a spell, the cost is paid with matching colored materia. But that's not the only option you have. You'll notice materia tokens have various symbols on them, known as runes, and there are 3 different types: square, triangle, and circle. When paying the cost of a spell, you can always treat any 3 materia sharing the same rune symbol as a single wild materia, which counts as 1 token of any color. And you can use multiple sets of 3 matching runes as wild materia when paying the cost to learn a spell, as long as at least 1 point of the cost is paid with an actual single token of that spell's color. For example, let's say I want to learn the level 4 version of this green spell. I must pay at least 1 token of its cost with a regular green materia. And then I'll use these 3 tokens with matching runes as a wild, these other 3 matching runes as another wild, and another green as the 4th token. I'd add a green token to the appropriate level as usual, and then discard all of these other tokens into the tray. Just keep in mind you can only use wilds when paying the cost to learn a spell. Wilds can't be used for any other purpose. When you learn a spell, you gain access to the effect to the right of the token you placed, but you also have access to any of the levels below it. So here I have access to this effect and the one here. If I had learned the spell at level 5, I'd have access to all 3 effects. With that in mind, let's see how spell effects work. As we saw, each phase has a card action related to it, and these actions relate to using the effect from a spell you've previously learned that can then be cast during that related phase. Most spells will have a symbol in their top left-hand corner that matches a symbol shown for a phase of the game. This means that instead of performing the actions we've learned so far, during a phase, you might instead choose to resolve the action on a single spell you've learned that shows that phase's symbol. For example, this red spell has the morning phase symbol here, and let's say we had previously learned the level 4 version of it. That means I could resolve this effect as my morning phase action. Here it says, if I choose to discard a materia with the triangle rune, I can then draw 4 materia from the pouch. Now don't forget, when you've learned a spell, you've also unlocked the effects for the levels below it. So I could instead perform this action if I wanted, discarding a circle rune to draw 4 from the pouch. So for this spell, the more powerful versions don't allow you to draw more tokens, they just give you more options for the types of runes you can discard to activate its ability to draw 4. Let's quickly go through the other spells that you'll also find in your first game. When you resolve the purple spell, you gain 2 materia showing the related rune symbol for that level. If I was resolving the level 5 effect of this spell, I'd take 2 square runes from the altar. Now, if there was only 1 rune of that type at the altar, I'd just take that 1. Keep in mind, even though you might have access to the actions below the level you've unlocked, you can't combine them in a single turn. So I couldn't use this spell to gain 1 square runed materia and 1 circle runed materia. When taking a card action, you must pick exactly 1 row to resolve. This black spell lets you store materia of the same color. The rune symbol doesn't matter. And remember, storing is when you move materia from your personal pool to your familiar board. The green spell allows you to swap a certain number of materia with the altar. Anytime you swap, exchange that number of materia from your personal pool with the materia on the altar. The exchange is considered to be happening instantaneously, so you can still make an exchange even if you're already at your maximum of 9 materia. This spell is quite unique because it lets you discard the related rune from your pool in order to increase another spell by 1 level. Remember, I said earlier that you can't use the Learn One Spell action to upgrade an action that you learned earlier, and this is still true, but you can use this spell to upgrade one you've previously learned. If I targeted this one, I would just, first of all, pay the cost. In this case, either a triangle or a circle rune. I'll just discard this triangle rune. And then I move the token of another spell up 1 space. Once a spell is at the top level, it can't be upgraded anymore. And you also can't use the white spell effect to upgrade the white spell. Moving on, the blue level 3 spell doesn't do anything. But as we'll see later, any spell you learn will earn you points at the end of the game. That said, when you unlock level 4, you can use the action here during the evening phase to learn 1 spell using 1 materia, matching the rune placed on the space to the left as a wild. So this arrow symbol just means you use the specific rune showing to the left as the necessary symbol for the related effect. Let's say I was using this effect to learn this yellow spell. I could spend these 2 yellow materia, and then the ability here also lets me use materia showing this rune as its own wild, giving me a total of 3 materia to pay the cost of this level 3 yellow spell. Just be aware, when you're specifically using this effect to learn a spell, you can't also use 3 matching runes as wild. The ability here replaces the usual method for creating wilds, but again, only when you're using this effect. For example, we could still use these as a wild if we wanted to learn a yellow spell using the regular learn spell action. Speaking of which, yellow is our final spell to go over, and you'll notice it doesn't have a symbol for which phase you can resolve this in because it works a bit different. These effects have a lightning bolt symbol that represent an instant effect. This means that as soon as you learn a spell here, let's say we learned the level 4 spell, you immediately resolve the effect it shows, and then it's not resolved ever again. Even if you use this spell, to upgrade this spell's level, the upgraded effect is not resolved. Instant effects only resolve when a token is placed here during the Learn a Spell action. With that, we've covered all the spells you'll find in your first game, and if you have questions while playing or want to learn the other spell versions, you'll find those detailed here in the rulebook. That said, I do want to mention a symbol found on one of the cards we're not currently using. This is known as a permanent effect, which means it's resolved anytime its condition would apply. In this case, anytime you learn a spell. And with that, we've learned all the possible actions you can take. And remember, during each phase, you can only perform a single action from the ones listed for that phase on your player aid. And you can always skip a phase if you want. After a player has finished their evening phase action, they resolve this section of their player aid, and here it instructs you that if the altar has fewer than 5 materia on it, you draw tokens from the pouch until 5 of its spaces are filled. On the other hand, it says here that if 5 to 9 materia are already here at the end of your turn, you instead draw a single materia and add that to the altar. And finally, if there are already 10 or more materia on the altar at the end of a player's turn after they've completed their evening phase, you discard all materia from the altar and then draw 5 new materia randomly from the pouch to place on the altar. During the game, if the pouch is ever empty when you would need to draw from it, pause and put all of the discarded tokens from the tray back into the pouch, and then continue drawing as necessary. After a player has finished their evening phase and resolved the altar, the next player in clockwise order takes their turn. And turns will continue like this until a player fulfills one or more of the following conditions. Either they've learned all 7 of their spells, meaning they have a materia on each one, or they've filled in the last available space on their familiar board. After a player has completed either or both of these conditions, turns continue just until everyone has had an even number of turns, which would mean after the player seated to the right of the person who's holding the start player token has gone. Then it's time to calculate the final scores. First, check the shield symbol within each spell row where you place the materia and earn the points showing on that row and that row only. So for example, we wouldn't earn both the 4 and the 2 points below, just the 4 points here. On this yellow spell, we'd earn 7 points, and so on. Once you've totaled all your points from learned spells, add to this the points showing on the lowest valued visible shield symbol of your familiar, so 11 in this case. The player with the most points wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player who learned the most spells wins. If there's still a tie, the tied player with the most materia in their personal pool wins. And if there's still a tie, the tied players share the victory. And don't forget, each time you play, you can use a different combination of spells. The game also comes with rules for solo play detailed here on the back of the rulebook, but those rules I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play SpellBook. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.